This is a
Barakallah feekum.
ridiculous contention.
Yeah, I do want to hear what Rami has to say, but before we do that, Brother Anhel, do you want to excuse yourself? I know you have to go.
Yeah, I was about to say, man, I'm sorry. I feel like I was just here for like moral support.
No, bro. You know what? Next time you should do this presentation because I really believe with your voice, it would
I'll put
enhance.
everyone to sleep, bro.
It would enhance the communicative effect, man. Your voice just enhances everything, bro. You could talk about carpet cleaner and everyone would enjoy it.
Yeah, they're gonna enjoy it in their dreams, bro. They'll be
Yeah, like that's
sleeping while
you.
they're listening to me.
Okay, man, I bless you, man. I know it's late there, bro.
Yeah,
Give
God
salam,
bless you,
give
bro.
salam to the French.
we are trying to establish a regular
Yes.
schedule, and once we figure that out, inshallah, all three of us, me, Rami, and Anhel, will be there. Inshallah, it's gonna be 2 times a week for regular live streams. Once we figure it out, you guys will be the first to know. But Anhel, thank you for your time, bro. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum, y'all. May Allah bless y'all. Hamza, brother, good talking to you again. And may Allah bless you for everything you do, bro.
I mean, you
Honestly.
too,
The protein shake. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay, Rami,
Alright.
what are your thoughts, bro?
I think,
To me, it was pretty clear.
yeah, very clear, very concise. I think just a very general way to summarize it is that the word kul does not mean every single thing, and it just could mean many things. So many of the living
Yes.
things were created in Paris, and that would not be an inaccurate statement to make. Obviously, it's a lot deeper for that, but for anyone who feels a little lost, if there's anyone who does, that's basically a very, very, very reductionist articulation of what Protein Sheikh Hamza just presented to us.
I know I could share these slides with people as well. Anyway,
All right.
I could send them to you, and you guys could share with your audiences.
Yeah,
Inshallah, they could
Yeah,
download
we could
it.
probably add it like in the description or something. For sure, I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
All right. So next, era of the function of the mountains. I think that is a very interesting one. So I'm gonna pull that up and play.
This is
So
And guys, please smash that like button so this video hits more hearts, reaches more people, gives them more knowledge. That's all we ask.
inshallah.
Jazakallah khair.
All right. So I'm gonna pull up 326:15.
Lizard that is female-only species and bacteria that is genderless. Oh, but then there's this. But then there's this. Surah 16 verse 15, he had placed in the earth firm mountains, so it does not shake with you, as well as rivers and pathways, so you may find your way. What is he saying? That mountains prevent earthquakes. They are pegs that stabilize the earth, without which there would be no earthquakes. However, that is not the cause of earthquakes. And this is something I actually thought about recently. And if you tune into my podcast, I was asking questions about this as well. However, through exploration, we came to the conclusion that tectonic plates are real. All you got to do is look at the Mariana Trench. All you got to do is look at the Mariana Trench. And we know that earthquakes are formed by tectonic plates being pushed together and sending them up. This movement of the tectonic plates that cause is what causes earthquakes. What am I saying? If there were no tectonic plates, there would be no mountains. If there were no there would be no. The same thing that causes mountains is the same thing that causes earthquakes. You trying to say that mountains prevent earthquakes?
Some may add no.
How did Allah get this wrong?
Okay, so this argument is basically he's stating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in the Qur'an, and I'm basically using his words here and putting it onto the Qur'an. Well, the verses here. So he's basically saying that Allah says in the Qur'an that he has put mountains on the earth so that basically it prevents or limits earthquakes. And then he says tectonic plates are what causes earthquakes, and they're also the same thing that causes mountains. So the same thing that cause mountains cause earthquakes. How would that even make sense?
Yeah, so he also mentions mountains have pegs, I believe, as well. So he didn't refer to the verse, but I've put it here anyway. when Allah says in chapter 78, and make the mountains to keep it stable, or the mountains as pegs. Now, there's an interesting thing here. So let's first summarize the contention. The Quran says that the mountains have pegs that stabilize earth and prevent earthquakes. However, they do not, and earthquakes are not caused by having no mountains. The first thing we need to understand is, well, the Quran does not mention how earthquakes are formed in this verse, and it does not say that mountains prevent earthquakes from occurring. It doesn't really say that. Allah says that the earth doesn't shake or sway. Now, you could infer that may mean an earthquake, but the Quran itself mentions earthquakes many times, that it decimated societies in the past. For example, Quran 29:37. And, you know, the verse mentions that the earth will not shake or sway. Not necessarily there will be no earthquakes. So there is a subtle difference here that needs to be understood, because, you know, there is a conflation or misreading here. There's a conflation between earthquakes occurring and the earth not swaying or shaking. Now, so from that perspective, you can see that this is a misreading of the verse. You've done an eisegesis. You've read into the verse. You don't allow the verse to read to you, if you like, yeah? And you've read into it. You're thinking this must mean earthquakes, and this must mean this how earthquakes are formed. No, the Quran doesn't mention that at all. Allah just basically says that the mountains, they stand firm on the earth to prevent it shaking under you. That's it. The rest of what you're doing is now an eisegesis. You're reading into the text unnecessarily. But let's go to another answer. Well, let's assume that it is earthquakes. What's very interesting, modern science, 2020, and in two specific papers that I've cited here, actually shows that mountains reduce the harm and impact of earthquakes. In a study published in 2020, Sun, Safa, and Ellis conducted computer simulations and discovered that undersea mountains weaken earthquakes. And this study was published in the journal in the journal Nature Geoscience. Also, you had Ma, Archuleta, and Page conducted a study on the San Gabriel Mountains and its relation to Los Angeles, and they found that when an earthquake occurs, the San Gabriel Mountains reduce its intensity by up to 50%. They concluded that the San Gabriel Mountains act as a shield for Los Angeles, reducing seismic excitations from earthquakes. So you have some science here. I'm not saying this is fully conclusive, but you have some science here that's indicating that actually mountains do reduce earthquakes. Yeah. Now, there are more robust answers in my view. Yeah. But before we get into that, let's talk about the pegs here, because he also mentioned pegs. So let's unpack that as well. So in the Quran, chapter 78:6, Allah says, and make the mountains to keep it stable, and the mountain, or another translation, the mountains as pegs. So the relevant word here is awtad, okay? Now the root of this word is waw, ta, dal, and it has the following meanings: peg, pin, stake, to firmly fix, and to be firmly established. So I don't know why they were dismissing this as wrong, because at the end of the day, this is well known now in geology that mountains have roots. If you pick a normal geology book, I have one, I think it's in the office, and it's on like geology, and it talks about, it has a subheading that says, do mountains have roots? And it explains why mountains have roots. Yeah, this is well known in geology now.
And by the way, is the author a non-Muslim?
Yeah, the non-Muslim.
Just to make it clear.
Yeah, for sure. And not only that, the roots of the mountains help the mountains stay up and last a long time. Please note, what does Allah say? The words awtad mean, it comes from waw, ta, dal. It could mean to fix firmly, to be firmly established. So the roots of the mountains firmly establish the mountains in terms of that they could stay up and they last a long time. And there are ample references in the literature. I just picked one from online, but there's many, many more in many books. Yeah. And one example I picked was, once plate tectonic processes build a mountain range, the buoyant underlying root enables the mountain range to hang around a long time, even while it's being actively eroded. So, and remember, firmly established. If you take this word to mean firmly established, which is one of its valid meanings, the mountains are firmly established because of its because of its roots, if you like. Yeah. So the mountains are firmly established, and the reason they're firmly established because they have roots, and the roots have a function to keep the mountains up and to keep them going for a long time. So the valid meaning of autad doesn't have to be peg, because he dismissed it as, oh, what does this mean? It could also mean firmly established. And we know that mountains have roots that firmly establish the mountains. And this is well known in geology. Yeah, just go to any reference. Answer number 4, I like this one. This one is transhistorical, meaning, well, kind of transhistorical, from the point of view that you don't need any science to actually try and justify this, because a valid classical and modern interpretation of chapter 16, verse 15, is that this refers to the creation of the earth and the role of the formation of the mountains during that time, meaning the time when the earth was created. Like, I think it's about 4 billion years ago. And this was before the existence of humanity, and is connected to another verse in Qur'an 49:9-10. And the classical exegetes, they actually connect 16:15 to 49:9-10, which talks about the creation of the earth. So, and one view amongst various views on this issue states that the earth was shaking or swaying. It had instability when it was forming, when it was becoming earth, right? When earth was becoming what we see today. It had a shaking or swaying, had instability. And the formation of the mountains at that time helped stop the swaying or shaking. Now, this view is not against established science. Why? Because science cannot confirm or reject this really with any conclusivity, because it was like 4 billion years ago. So it's almost impossible to claim with any scientific certainty that this view is an unscientific view. So, and this is a valid interpretation. It's actually, this is the interpretation of the Salaf, the pious predecessors, right? So here's a chronological list of scholars who held this view. It's not exhaustive, but here's a chronological order, yeah? You have Qais bin Ubadah, right? I think he was Sahabi, yeah. You had Hassan al-Basri, the famous scholar. You have Abdul Razak, 200 years after Hijrah. Ibn Kathir, the famous classical exegete, right? Abu al-Sa'ud. You had al-Sharawi. You have al-Sabuni, right? And, you know, you have a whole list of scholars from the first 3 generations, the best generations to have lived, to have lived amongst the Muslims. It's the Salaf, the pious predecessors, are spiritual masters, if you like, yeah? They had the view that this was about the early formation of the earth. It's not about now. It's about the early formation of the earth, because when the earth was forming and developing into the earth that it is today, the earth was swaying or shaking, and the formations of mountains during that period actually stopped the swaying or shaking prior to the existence of humanity. And this is kind of trans-scientific, if you like. It transcends science from the point of view that the science cannot, with any kind of conclusive evidence, go against this point. So based on this contention, based on this contention is misplaced. The verse does not refer to earthquakes in the present. Rather, it refers to the stabilizing function mountains had in the early development of the earth as a planet before animals and humans existed. And I've given you a bunch of references, many references here for you to look at. So the conclusion is the valid interpretation is not at odds with the scientific understanding. And as we said, the scientific error narrative would only work if they could show that all the valid meanings and interpretations are actually going against established science, or if there was only one interpretation, that interpretation itself is going against valid science. And you can't do that with this at all, especially when you look at the 4th answer. So there's nothing wrong with the Quranic usage of the word autad, or that can mean peg or firmly fixed or firmly established, because we know mountains are firmly established, and lo and behold, they have roots, and those roots are responsible to keep the mountains where they are and to keep them growing for a long time. In other words, firmly fixed, firmly established. Also, chapter 16, verse 15, when the mountains are supposed to, not prevent shaking or stop the earth from swaying or shaking. We actually see this in the scientific literature, that mountains actually reduce, even by 50%, the kind of seismic impact of earthquakes And also, if you take the view of some of the pious predecessors, that this has nothing to do with the mountain's functions now, or even earthquakes now. It was to do with the early formation of the earth, because the scholars link this to chapter 49, verse 9 to 10, which is talking about the formation of the earth. And during that time, there was swaying and shaking of the earth. One could imagine maybe some kind of top layer, whatever the case may be. And the initial mountains that were formed actually stabilized the earth in order for subsequent animals and humans many, many years after to be able to live, and functionally live as species on planet Earth. This cannot be denied categorically by science or even affirmed, and therefore it's not a scientific error by virtue of that. So from that perspective, this valid interpretation is not at odds with anything that's established scientifically. So again, it's a misreading, it's a misunderstanding. There are many different valid interpretations based on the language and based on the classical exegetical tradition.
Crystal clear. Rami, what are your thoughts?
Yeah.